Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield audio podcast.
The question that I'm asked almost more than any other question people think to ask me is, what podcasts do you listen to? And I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but I do find it a little funny that rather than asking what books I read or asking where I travel or asking who my influences are, it's very indicative of our age that they ask, what podcasts do you listen to? So I'm going to take a few minutes and tell you exactly what podcasts I listen to on a regular basis. And hopefully this will be helpful for you. I think it's a great theme to talk about here before Memorial Day weekend. Maybe you're laying around the pool with your headphones in and you're thinking about, other things. And so this is a great time to maybe tell you what I listen to. At a very practical level, the podcast I find the most helpful for tech reasons is a podcast called MacMost Now. Bev and I even joke about Gary being on our staff, and when we don't know something about our mini Macintosh products, we'll say, well, we should ask Gary and talk about him like he's on staff. MacMost Now is a wonderful video podcast in which a young man named Gary tells us what we need to know about Mac products. He gives us updates on products. He reviews the recent conferences. He explains some esoterica about Macs. He really has been helpful. And given the fact that a lot of my life is writing and therefore being on a computer a lot, and of course, administratively, we use Macs all the time, and Bev certainly does in her video and audio work and all kinds of things. Gary has been wonderful. So MacMost Now, at a very practical tech level, is definitely one of my most prized podcast. I also listen to the EntreLeadership Podcast, ENTRE, and then the word leadership attached to it, podcast. This is a podcast started by Dave Ramsey, friend of mine. Many of you know him as the tremendous teacher of getting out of debt and handling your finances well and living out clear values about all things material and financial and regarding your money. So I listen to EntreLeadership all the time. It really is a podcast about leadership. It's about entrepreneurship. That's the name. They do tremendous interviews. They interview fascinating people. They interview some idiots like me. I've been on there, but it really is a lot of fun. It's very interesting, and I can't recommend it enough. Really, really good stuff. Now, as you know, I care very much about men, and one of the podcasts I really enjoy listening to is The Art of Manliness. Gentleman named Brett McKay, by whom I've been interviewed, but I do not know him well other than just talk to him on the phone, does this podcast, and it's about men themes. It'll be about anything from leadership to body weight exercises to some fascinating stories out of the lives of people like Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln, things like that. So The Art of Manliness is a podcast I pay very close attention to. I also pay attention a lot to politics, as you can imagine. I'm sure many of you do as well. And so I watch actually the McLaughlin Group. The McLaughlin Group is a National Public Television discussion show. It includes a number of people, including Pat Buchanan and others. I really enjoy watching it, and I download it like a podcast and watch it whenever I can. It usually loads maybe Saturday or Sunday, sometimes Monday. But the McLaughlin Group, it's a DC institution. It's a National Public Television institution. Probably won't be around forever, but I watch it every week. It's a great thing to just pull out on an airplane and watch on my iPhone. I also listen to National Public Radio Politics broadcasts. I really enjoy that. It's very well done. Of course, in a roundtable discussion, you're not going to agree with everything that's said there, but I think it's important that you hear alternate views. And so I really do enjoy that. And I listen to NPR Politics podcast. Very, very helpful. For political matters, I don't listen to a great deal. In fact, that pretty much defines everything I listen to. What I prefer to listen to, rather than podcasts where the headlines are analyzed, what I prefer to listen to are podcasts that help me with the background, help me with the history I don't know, help me with analyzing the headlines more from a historical depth and background sort of perspective. So I listen to a number of podcasts in that regard. One of them is called Backstory, interestingly enough, and it's technically titled Backstory with the American History Guys. I like this podcast very much. It has lots of fascinating stories in it. For example, one podcast is about China and the U.S., another's about the history of farmers in America, another's about the history of the supernatural. It's called American Spirit, A History of the Supernatural, and it's just very, very interesting. The fascinating one I listened to not long ago is called Body Politics, Disability in America. So this is all about the background of the things in the news, even down to where did we get the idea of 3 meals a day, and where did we get the sort of food charts that we see that tell us what we ought to be eating, and what religions were born in America. There's a fascinating podcast about Islam and the United States. I can analyze the news on my own. There's lots of analysis of what's happening now. I hang out with a lot of analysts and consultants and scholars. So that side of things is not that difficult for me, not that inaccessible. But what I need is depth, background, history, the run-up to the current news that I don't know. I just find that fascinating. And that, by the way, brings me to another podcast that I really enjoy, and it's called Stuff You Missed in History Class. Now, I've studied a lot in history. I've been in a lot of history classes, but I'm not so arrogant as to believe that I can't be taught something by somebody who does a podcast like this. This is very well done, very funny, very relaxed. It's called Stuff You Missed in History Class. And man, do I feel stupid sometimes when they are talking about things I should know, but don't. And then, interestingly enough, given what I just said, there's also a podcast called Stuff You Should Know. And this will be on any kind of topic, but it tends to be on things I can really use. For example, one podcast is called Sir Isaac Newton, greatest scientist of all time, ? Another one's called Timber, How It Works. Another one's called Cryotherapy. How does that work? There's a history of mincemeat. What about rabies? What's rabies? Here's one that you'll like. What's the deal with poop? ? Now, these are seriously treated, even though the title sometimes will be, sort of frivolous and fun and a little bit sardonic. Approximately 10 Things That Vanished Mysteriously is the title of one of them. I find it a lot of fun. I find it fascinating. I'm looking at a list here, how futurology works. Here's one for you. I bet you don't know anything about this. The Satanic Panic of the 1980s. And then the very one before that's about Lizzie Borden and how she worked. So I really recommend Stuff You Should Know and Stuff You Missed in History Class. Now, of course, I listen to some of the popular podcasts like Radio Lab. Definitely, I listen to On the Media. These are very popular podcasts on clear themes. Radio Lab's one of the most popular podcasts in the country. On the Media. There are some that I check into from time to time. Fresh Air, of course, is the regular broadcast of National Public Radio and beautifully recorded, and it'll be on various topics. For example, one's titled here recently, A Glimpse Inside the Real Russia, and then they have country icon Loretta Lynn, and then Remembering Gary Shandling. I just listened to a fascinating podcast given my writing about soldiers, and in doing that, I specifically visited Abu Ghraib, the famous prison where the abuses took place in Iraq. And this one was from one of the gentlemen who was there. And it was called It Was Torture. An Abu Ghraib interrogator confesses. And then they have one on Merle Haggard and et cetera, and et cetera. Really, really well done. A variety of topics, broadens me out quite a bit, really helps me. So these are the main podcasts that I listen to. Now, I'll listen to some other things too. I go to 2 churches, one in DC and one in Nashville. I listen to those podcasts, the podcast of Church of the Redeemer in Nashville, the podcast of Grace Covenant Church in DC. I enjoy that. Of course, I listen to This American Life because it is the #1 podcast in America, maybe in the world for all I know. And I like just, even though I don't find it that engaging personally, I like knowing what other people are paying attention to, what's shaping the culture, what's popular. And then there are a couple that I listen to mainly to learn from. For example, I have one called Anglican Studies. It's a basic Anglican course, of course, on Anglicanism. And of course, I attend an Anglican church, consider myself Anglican in my theology, so I enjoy very much paying attention to that. And I occasionally would download a course via podcast and listen to it that way. But I'll tell you, I really do find that podcasts are not only a tremendous time saver, but they can be really stimulating. They're fantastic during your workout. And I am starting to pay attention to what's available by podcasts even more than I ever have, and trying to sample a lot of different podcasts. They're tremendous ways to learn, tremendous ways to increase what you know, tremendous ways to track the culture, track what's happening with the culture. But I'd have to say, just to bring it to a close, that the most practically helpful podcast that I listen to is MacMost Now, again by our friend Gary, who teaches us how to use our Macs. I would have to say that EntreLeadership, E-N-T-R-E, and then the word leadership, EntreLeadership is one of the ones I deeply rely on. I'm moved and stirred and inspired by the Art of Manliness. I watch every week to keep up on political debate, the McLaughlin Group and National Public Radio Politics podcasts. And then, of course, there are all these others that I pay attention to for historical background, stuff you missed in history class, stuff you should know, backstory with the American history guys. And, of course, after that, I pretty much pay attention to whatever is popular so that I can keep up with the trends, keep up with what people are hearing, keep up even with things I strongly disagree with, but that are shaping our culture. And in that regard, I listen to This American Life and Radio Lab and On the Media. Hey, I'd love to hear from you. If you've got some great podcasts I should be listening to, let me know. Contact us at info@stephenmansfield.tv. And check out these podcasts. By the way, I don't have any commercial connection with any of them. Some of the folks who speak on them are friends, or at least acquaintances, like Brett McKay of Art of Manliness. But I have no commercial connection to any of these. These are actually the podcasts I listen to. Enjoy.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator on Fox and CNN. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and The Miracle of the Kurds. His new book is Ask the Question: Why We Must Demand Religious Clarity from Our Presidential Candidates, available on Amazon. Learn more about Stephen at stephenmansfield.tv. The Stephen Mansfield Podcast is directed by Isaac Darnold, who also wrote, produced, and performed the podcast theme song. This is a Chartwell Literary Group production.